Hi, this is Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about the shape of the tabletop role-playing game industry, specifically the foundation of the tabletop role-playing game industry and the precipice of the foundation role-playing industry. So I've been reading John Harper's Blades in the Dark, and it's really made me think a lot about the tabletop role-playing game industry as a whole, because I do think this is a special moment. That game is... it's really historically significant, and the things that John Harper is doing in there is, one, it's a distillation of some really core, awesome concepts from tabletop role-playing games, distilled into a new core rulebook. And core rulebooks are, I think, really where the game is going to live going forward. So when I look at it, that specific game, I think there's some really fundamental changes that are going to come out of it. One, I think one of the things that John Harper's doing that has never been done to the level he's doing it is saying, you really is illustrating. This has been said before, but he's illustrating that if you think about the setting in the rules mechanics, you come out with a better game. Okay, and that's pretty major. The other thing is party types. Right, we've all had character sheets for our characters for a long time, but the idea of party types at the level that John Harper has shown it, I think is going to impact games for a long, long time. So right now, without a doubt, John Harper's Blades in the Dark is the precipice of the tabletop role-playing game industry. It's the very peak. It is the highest, right? So, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, is it better than 5th edition, right? 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And I was thinking about this, and I really gave it a lot of thought, and I was thinking, and then I realized, I really think that the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing, the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing games do not ever compete for best in the market. And the reason why is they're the foundation of the market. They really are. They're the foundation of the market. They're what everyone pushes off of. So Dungeons & Dragons at this point, because of what it is and where it and who's attached and what's happening with it, it really never competes for best tabletop role-playing game. It is the foundation of the tabletop role-playing game market and the industry itself. And I think that's the way to think about Dungeons & Dragons, is it's the foundation, it's the bedrock that everything else sits upon. And so it doesn't matter what your tabletop role-playing game is, it doesn't matter what it's accomplishing, if it is a tabletop role-playing game. And I define that as a collaborative storytelling game with a table and with a game master. If it's missing any of those three parts, if it's not a storytelling, if it doesn't include collaborative storytelling, if it doesn't include a table, and if it doesn't include a game master, it's really not a tabletop role-playing game. But essentially, Dungeons & Dragons now sits, as and it's what everyone is launching their products from, right? And I think the reason for this is Dungeons & Dragons has more players than all other role-playing games combined. I believe that's true, right? And additionally, I think it has to do with Gygax. So he birthed the tabletop role-playing game industry, where it's still not even 50 years old, right? So, and actually, yeah, because it came out in 74, 84, 94, 2004, 2014, right? So in 2024, the entire industry will be 50 years old. So we're really still in its infancy. And so with that said, you could see where Dungeons & Dragons is. So from the precipice perspective, I think if you start to roll it back, right? I think previously Cypher was a precipice for Cypher by Monty Cook Games was absolutely a precipice for the tabletop role-playing game industry. Fate Core and Fate Accelerated by Fred Hicks was absolutely a precipice. I absolutely think that Pathfinder was a precipice in a dark time. 4th edition had a lot of people upset, and Pathfinder was a precipice of the industry at one point. There have been quite a few, and when you talk about Precipice, you're talking about a game that takes everything that's great in the hobby, distills it, makes it available, pushes it to the masses, and pushes the game further, right? So like Pathfinder, I think what Pathfinder did was it pushed the art further. Pathfinder's layout and art is the best in the tabletop role-playing game industry that I have ever seen. Its production values on its books were the very best. I don't think they were beat by anybody. Fred Hicks's Fate, right? What that did was, I think that did several things. One, it created the idea of a free role-playing game. Fate Accelerated Edition, a completely self-contained tabletop role-playing game system that's 50 pages long, that can be used to run in any genre. That's never been done before, and it really pushed the idea of what if we didn't charge for our game. In addition to that, it really showed the value of Rules Light, right? And actually, Rules Light is 50 pages. Like it has set the standard. So Fate is incredibly important. I think what Cypher did was it set the standard for a universal role-playing system. And I understand that GURPS is out there, but an any genre system, Cypher is the very best. It's the very best that's ever been written. Another thing that Cypher did was Cypher showcased, here is what the very best games creation from a company perspective is doing. I think Monty Cook is running Monty Cook Games, that company, in a way that's with a level of professionalism that has never been seen in any tabletop role-playing game company, including Wizards of the Coast, including TSR, right? I will throw it in here as well. I do think that Edge of the Empire was a Precipice. It brought forward custom dice. Now that was a failure. Really, I think custom dice have generally been a failure. Custom dice are used in the Star Wars tabletop role-playing game because they can exist there. The Star Wars brand is so strong, and there's such a strong desire to play in the Star Wars world that you can pretty much get away with anything, right? I absolutely loved custom dice, and I would really like to see them go out to a lot of new games. But that didn't happen. It was really rejected by players and really rejected by game masters almost across the board. But the Star Wars players love that game, and they love the dice mechanic, and it's remained unique. But that was a huge swing, right? That was a big risk that company took. And honestly, I was worried for a while. There was a time where you could not buy those dice, and I was worried that they were going to lose the license, and that those dice were going to become incredibly valuable, right? And FFG proves me wrong, and that's another issue. That's another thing that Edge of the Empire proved, is how to manage a licensed tabletop role-playing game. So these Precipices, they give an amazing play experience. They do something in the hobby that's never been done before. They point the way for the future of the hobby, right? Now, strangely, I'm starting to think that Dungeons & Dragons doesn't need to do any of those. It really fundamentally exists as a new type of game. It exists as the cornerstone, right? It is what everything else is built off of. And so it doesn't need to introduce new things. It can take from the best out there and incorporate them. And so that's another thing I think that needs to be understood when you acknowledge Dungeons and Dragons, the current edition, as the foundation and the springboard from what everything else is launched. Then at that point you can understand that maybe it really makes you start to think maybe there should never be innovation in the Dungeons and Dragons current edition. And the reason why is because everything comes from Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons really has free reign to go and pick the best rules mechanics, which, by the way, rules mechanics actually can't be really copyrighted anyway, and incorporate them into their game. Now, the reality is, I think, at all times, Dungeons and Dragons has been respectful. Like, it will change the rule in a way, it'll refer to it in a different way, where it's not out, where it's an homage. There's a difference between an homage and stealing, right? But the reality is, I personally feel that Dungeons and Dragons really has the right to take the best mechanics that are out there and incorporate them into their next edition. And I think I've come to the point where I believe that you really shouldn't innovate in the Dungeons and Dragons current edition. And we're coming up on 6th edition now, and I have literally a lot of thoughts about 6th edition and what it should be. But I just wanted to discuss the precipices and the foundation. And I think, where I've landed is the following. One, I think it's important for all tabletop role-playing game enthusiasts to know where the current precipice is. And I'm telling you right now, current precipice, absolutely without a doubt, is John Harper's Blade in the Dark. If you haven't bought it, buy it. It's amazing. It's stellar. It's a gleaming example of what a tabletop role-playing game should be. And then also, Dungeons and Dragons does not compete with any tabletop role-playing game in the industry. It is the foundation of the industry, and every tabletop role-playing game designer, it's almost like you have to pay your respects and understand that you're never going to beat Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. What you're going to do is you're going to honor the game by creating a tabletop role-playing game that is respectful of what came before it and is pointing toward a bright, shining future that Dungeons & Dragons has made possible. Thank you.